Hi, everyone. Welcome to, I believe this is episode 20 or 20 or 21. I think it's 20 of All Things Metaphysical podcast with Kelly and Gail. I'm the Gail part.
I'm the Kelly part.
So, as per usual, Kelly and I were having a discussion about what we would like to start with today. And a friend's granddaughter asked the most interesting question that I don't know that I ever thought about before. So I thought that would be a great place to start. So the question on the table is, do angels have free will?
I love that question, especially from a child. My understanding, my feeling is they do, but angels are more advanced than we are. So they use their free will as positive in nature. And I know I've said that before, and people have said, well, doesn't that limit them? Well, not if you're an angel. They don't see it as limiting. They just happen to go that way. Although there are dark angels as well who also have free will. So that's how I would answer that. What do you think?
Well, I always just thought of angels as, whether they're angels, whether they're beings that, humans who've transcended and maybe gone up to the angel ranks, depending on how you want to think about it. I just always think about it's their job to serve. So I assume that there's free will in there, but I don't know any angels who turn down assignments. So, I think that we think about it from a human perspective and what our human minds can think about. And so we can't get to that next level where we would understand it beyond free will. That yes, there's free will, but this is what they devoted. This is what their soul or being or essence or matter, however we want to think of them, this is their purpose.
Right.
I guess that's how I've always thought about it for myself, but it really made me stop and think about why do we believe some of the things that we believe? And then I had a friend who gave me some information, and she said, you have to be prepared to shake your core to your beliefs to get to the next level that you're going to. And I'm like, that's really interesting.
It is interesting.
Because I think I'm pretty open-minded now and willing to look at most things and why I believe certain things and where they come from. But I'll share this with everyone. Why not? The thing that I have to get past and that sometimes I'm struggle with is that letting go of that kind of human connection and thinking of my human family versus my spiritual family.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm more connected to the other side than I actually am to this side.
I am as well. Right there with you. It's hard for me much of the time to just stay right here. There are so many other dimensions that are infinitely more interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. So I just think that that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's always made me just question a lot of things. Sometimes when people ask me a question, I really stop to think about it. Sometimes I'll channel the information and give it to them. Yeah. And then I can always tell, oh, we have a comment.
Oh, we have a comment. Good evening.
Good evening back. So for those of you who are tuning in or tuning in late, we started this discussion today with, do angels have free will? And what does that mean? And then what about ascended masters? What if we take that out? What about light beings? What about, how far do you want to take that concept out?
Right. And I think if we have to have it the way my mind works anyway, if one of these levels has free will, wouldn't they all? How would you have created a being? You can have free will, but you can't. That doesn't sound right to me. That doesn't set well with me. So I think they all have free will. But I do think as they are ascended masters in particular, it would be similar to angels in that they would choose through their free will to do the right thing. That makes sense in my head.
Here's a radical concept that they're telling me to bring up. I'm not sure I want to go here, but here we go. So, what if free will is just about third dimensional and living in duality? What if there's no such thing or no ideas about free will outside of the third dimension and duality?
I think that would be a workable thing for most levels, but someone who is dealing with humanity,
Mhm,
whatever being that is that's dealing with humanity, would almost have to have free will
mhm.
to deal with beings who have free will. I would think so.
And beings who have free will who make very interesting choices at times.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to judge anything as good or bad, but I think sometimes choices that we make as a humanity are very interesting.
They're quite interesting. And when you look at, making choices through free will, I think 90%, easily 90%. Okay, somebody's telling me 87% of humanity is still, they don't realize that they are using free will. They
Mhm,
don't realize, what they're doing. And that makes it a lot more interesting too, I think.
mhm. So, viewers that are watching us, what comments do you have about this discussion about free will and humanity and choices humanity's making? We'd love to get your feedback on it. It's just, I don't know. I've been in this and I'm sure most people have. Not only are we Mercury in retrograde, which I experienced firsthand, which I normally don't. I usually function better in retrograde,
Right.
but this time all my electronic equipment has decided not to cooperate. And also, full moon, Mercury in retrograde, and a full moon, a very interesting concept, very interesting energy blindsided a lot of people. And I know that, and I know that I'm aware of all those things going on, but the people that I work with are not. And I'm watching it play out and I'm watching their energetic responses to things they're not even aware that they're having.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah,
it's been really
that's
interesting.
always interesting. Yeah. But when you have a full moon anyway, humanity loses its collective mind. You know,
Mhm.
I used to work with a couple of nurses. They were ER nurses, and every full moon or before the full moon, they would say, "Don't come near the hospital on this date. It's a full moon. The crazies come out." And I always laughed about it until it was one of their birthdays, and I took a birthday dinner to them at the hospital. Oh, wow, they weren't kidding. It was pretty crazy. It was
Yeah,
pretty
I worked in a behavioral health hospital, and I think I would start quarter to eight, 8 in the morning. And
mhm,
you would walk in the door and you would hear codes that people were struggling to manage. You wouldn't need to look at a calendar because there was predominantly 3 times as many codes on the
right.
days of full moons and all day long versus on other days. It was the most fascinating thing to watch.
Yep, it was. And I think I've said on this show too, I worked at a group home, like a
Mhm.
halfway house kind of thing, and the full moons were crazy. And I could guarantee that there was one resident who would get arrested every full moon. She'd every full moon, just ripping her clothes off, running down the street screaming. And it was just, there's no other, it was just the full moon,
Mhm.
which is also related to free will.
Mhm.
That's one of the things that we can say. I understand about the full moon and the energies, and you've got a Mercury retrograde, I can't talk, retrograde on top of that. And we understand that
Mhm.
the energies are going to be a little bit wonkier than usual.
Mhm.
And most of the people that I interact with on a regular basis you can kind of, say the same thing. But when you have someone who is completely unaware, they are so affected and they don't even realize they're affected. And I've watched it time and time and time again through the years, and I know you have too.
Mhm.
It's just, the suicide hotline calls go up, police calls go up. All of these things happen, and people don't know what's going on. And
Mhm.
sometimes I think maybe that's the right idea. Maybe ignorance is bliss. I guess it's too late now, huh?
Yeah, and that's the hard part. Once you learn this stuff, you can't unlearn it. You can't
Right.
go back to that ignorant state, even if you may want to.
Yeah.
So I guess our viewers don't have any comments about our conversations.
Oh, well.
And one of the things, since we're talking about this and we're talking a little bit about mental health and such, one of the things, and I talked to you about maybe talking about this on the show, is trauma from an energetic perspective.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And how are the two related? And how can you work through trauma from an energetic perspective as well as a mental health perspective?
I think it's really timely to talk about this now because this particular full moon
Hmm.
is all about releasing, revisiting trauma, going deeper than you have before into the different layers that need to be healed. And so many people, we just don't do that.
Hmm.
You know, don't talk about it. It's been long enough. Don't talk about it anymore. That kind of stuff. It's over. Don't worry about it. But what that does is it sets us up for future failure. Because if you don't unpack it
Hmm.
and look at it and work with it and heal it and go through that darkness to heal it, it's just going to blow up again later. So, it's in your own best interest to work with it as it happens.
Hmm.
Trauma, the energy of trauma is very flighty. It can be here, it can be gone. You can be fine, and all of a sudden something has triggered you, and you're completely a mess for until you figure out, oh, wait a minute, what happened? Where'd that come from? But if you don't look at it, you're never going to know how to heal it. You
Hmm.
really have to look at it. And that's something that's been an issue I have with a lot of psychology in the United States is, bury it deeper, put a rock on top of it, put two rocks on, put a cinder block on top of it. And eventually, I used to have, when I ran a recording studio in San
Hmm.
Francisco, somebody gave me a t-shirt that said contents, warning, contents subject to sudden explosion, because that's the way it would be. Everything would be going fine, and I'd see something that somebody did that was really stupid, and I would blow up at everybody. And it took me a long time to unpack why that kept happening. But eventually I did unpack why that kept happening. But so many of us go through life and, you lose that job, or you get accused of that, or your car breaks down on the freeway. All of these little tiny traumas keep, they don't go anywhere. They keep festering. Yes, it does pop up like a beach ball that you hold underwater. Exactly. Yeah.
The other thing that I always think is interesting, like we can talk about trauma from the mental health perspective, but when you've had a lot of trauma, it's also stored in your body. So,
Hmm.
at what point do you do the body work along with the mental health component?
Honestly, that's a never ending thing. There's this book, I can't remember the author, but I know you know what I'm talking about. The Body Keeps the Score. And it's all about,
Bessel van der Kolk.
okay, it's all about how your body stores trauma.
I
And
just want to preference that if you're going to read that book, it can also cause you to have traumatic experiences. It's pretty graphic. So
it
keep
is.
that in mind. Just don't pick it up and think oh, wait, I'm going to read this. It's going to help me with my trauma. It also could traumatize you from reading it. So
Yeah, it's not light reading.
I always like to give a little bit of a disclaimer. Great book.
Yeah, it is not light reading though. But you really, depending on when you're, and what I found in different groups that I've been associated with, the longer you have that trauma without digging into it, the more is going to happen in your body. And I kind of did an very unscientific experiment with people I know that I have very similar backgrounds with. And we all went through certain types of childhood trauma. And if you look at, the over the 50, 60 years since those traumas occurred, most of us have the same kind of physical issues. I think that's very interesting.
So one of our viewers put Dr. Sue Morter does energy code healing. I found her stuff very helpful. There's a lot of people who are doing that now. There's a lot of energy workers who help with releasing trauma. Reiki helps with releasing trauma.
Yep.
But it's about in chi and the meridians. It's about moving the energy and getting the blockage out.
Well, everything is energy.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that affects us is also energy. So trauma is really, people don't get it. When I was a massage therapist, I would have somebody come in and say, well, my wrist is really sore. Do you think that's related to me pulling my neck? Well, let me see. Yeah, you know what? It looks like it's attached. But energy is the same way. In Reiki clients, somebody will say, why am I seeing red right now? I'm seeing like a bright red color right now, and my lower back hurts. Let's unpack this, shall we? It's like,
well, as working in behavioral health and mental health, the thing that I always did or brought to the clients that I worked with is they would talk about lower back pain, or they would talk about different pains in their body, and knowing that I knew so much about energy and healing, because I'm trained in I don't know how many healing modalities, but I would say, oh, well, tell me about your family of origin and beliefs that you get in the way, or if it's a power issue, how do you feel in certain situations, or are you able to digest your food? Because most people who have addictions, we don't think about this often, but most people who have addictions are blocked in their first three chakras.
right.
Family of origin issues, who they are in their world, and their sense of power.
Yep.
And when because I worked in eating disorders for like 20 years, when I would have them do the activity, draw your eating disorder, they always drew it in, not always, 90% of people drew it in green. I was fascinated by that. And so I talked to all these expressive therapists, and they're like, why do they keep drawing their eating disorders in green? And they're like, well, green represents wide open spaces. And I'm like, no, that doesn't feel right to me. And then one day it dawned on me, because they've closed their hearts down.
Yes.
And so their eating disorder is what was closing their heart down, so they represented it in green.
Yeah.
And I have talked to clients about chakras from time to time, and they all find it fascinating. They all like when we get to the higher ones, they all have a harder time with the bottom ones.
Yeah.
It's just really kind of interesting.
Yeah. When I started teaching spirituality, basically, I would get people who would come to me and they would say, I would always start on grounding, techniques. You cannot do anything unless you're grounded. And they want to be psychic. Can you teach me how to be psychic? How can I read people's minds? No, that's not what this is about. You have to start from the ground up. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're building a castle in the sky. Mm-hmm. It's not going to work.
And that's one of the biggest things with trauma work, is being in the present moment and grounded. Because oftentimes when people start to, and maybe we should delve a little bit deeper since we're off on this topic, is that people oftentimes dissociate. And for somebody who doesn't have trauma and doesn't know what dissociation is, a good way to think about it is you're driving your car, you're 6 exits down the highway, and you have no idea how you got there. You lose complete track of everything, except people who haven't had trauma can bring themselves back into the moment, or are jarred back in and like, oh my God, how did I lose that time? People who truly dissociate and have a difficult time have a really hard time bringing themselves back, because it doesn't feel safe. So one of the key components is also learning how to build safety.
And how to stop the replay. In speaking at battered women shelters, which I'm starting again next week. I'm excited. Yay. It's the replay that gets them stuck where they don't see a way out. And I do a lot of work with that. They will, you have to change this, you have to change the movie at some point. You can't keep rehashing and rehashing. It's over. It isn't done with because you're still dealing with it, but you have to find a way to move forward. And that sticks a lot of people up, especially moms who have kids who were also abused.
Mhm.
It really, and those kids, people overlook the kids. You have to start with the kids because otherwise they're going to end up like me,
Mhm.
and you're going to still be unpacking childhood things, when you're in your sixth decade. And that's not fun, but it has to be done. One of the things I tell people to stop it is to picture a pink elephant. When you know you're going down that road and you can't stop the loop, stop the loop, stop, it plays over and over. Stick a pink elephant in there. It's enough distraction so that
Mhm.
you can get off the merry-go-round. And that's sometimes all you really need to do. It's just something to take a step to either side. Otherwise the oncoming train's going to hit you and you're going to stay there forever.
So, any of our viewers have any comments or things that they want us to go further into discussion about trauma? I mean, it's not the way we're talking about it crosses between psychological and metaphysical, but I think they're so interconnected because one of the things, and I was explaining this to someone the other day, is that sometimes people choose to have all their trauma early in their life so that they can work through their karma and not have to carry that and continue to work it out. Some people's trauma can come later in life because they wanted to have a good childhood. I mean, their soul agreed to, it's really hard when you start talking about soul agreed to have this series of events happen to move the soul further. Because
Right.
as a human being, when people say that to me, I get pissed off.
Yeah.
You know.
And the thing that always got me, and what I hear from more formerly battered women than anything else, is it isn't something I can just walk away from. It
Mhm.
isn't something I can just say, it's over, I'm done, moving forward now. Because you do when you're processing trauma. A
Mhm.
lot of the time, you have to kind of look at it from every angle. And
Mhm.
when you look at it from every angle, it helps you heal it. It helps you see I had nothing to do with that. That situation I did not control. So you can kind of move forward one event at a time. And for women with children, there's a lot of that. You have to move through at the pace of the child
Mhm.
because the kid is already traumatized from the abuse. But you know what traumatizes them more? Seeing their mom so traumatized. And that hurt me. Um, my daughter, I put her in counseling from day one. I was like, we're out of that, boom, you're going to counseling. But so many people, oh, it's a kid, they'll forget it. Kids don't remember anything. I remember everything that happened to me when I was very young.
Well, one of two things happens. You remember everything in great detail, or you don't remember years of your life
Mhm.
because
Or
you've
both.
blocked it out so much. Both can be true. And when it starts to come back and you start to get flooded, it can be really difficult.
Yeah, yeah. I have a younger half sister. And I don't speak to her often, but the last time I talked to her, she says, "Do you remember me when I was like 8, 9, 10?" I'm like, Yeah, I was there when you were born, duh." She says, "I don't remember it." She doesn't remember from when she started school
Mhm.
till she graduated high school. She has blocked out 18 years of her life. And I find that interesting because in my family, there are most of us don't remember large segments, and that says a lot. Uh,
Mhm.
but you get through it, not all at once, not happily, not gleefully skipping down the path. It's hard work, but you get through it. You do the hard work, and I think that's the gist of every talk I've ever given at About a Women's Shelter. You
Mhm.
just do the hard work.
Sometimes it's the hardest work you're going to ever do, but you get yourself back in the process.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
learn how to thrive again and not just survive.
yeah.
And
Well,
watching that transformation is an amazing experience to be able and privileged to be a part of it for people.
One of the things when I go into these places, I've had people argue with me. There's no way you ever went through that. I am a very different person. It makes you a different person. And it also makes you, want to shoot at cows. It just not seriously, but I mean, it makes you want to really, you're very, you are not crossing this line. And that's something I never had boundaries. And that's something I think trauma does to you because you want so much to fit in with everyone
Mhm.
that you fit in nowhere. That's the sad part of the trauma energy.
One of the things too, and I've used myself as an example for this oftentimes, especially when I was, acting more in the therapy role than I am now, is that one of the things I had to relearn how to do was play
Yeah,
because I was very serious. I was kind of, for what I'm not going to get into the whole trauma history, but one of the things I had to do was learn how to play and to have fun and to find joy in things again. And everyone's like, "You? It seems so natural for you now." And I'm like, I really didn't start trying to reincorporate that into my life till my early 20s again.
yeah,
So I started to have fun again and stuff like that when I was in college. So, I mean, I think that there's so many different aspects of our life that get affected by trauma. And some people don't realize that some of their experiences are trauma.
right.
So, I mean, not that I'm pushing everyone to have trauma, but like if you can survive kindergarten and all the names that you were called on the playground and stuff, there's things that have shaped who you are. And
Right.
looking at how that continues to affect you now.
Absolutely. Trauma, I saw a bumper sticker, trauma isn't for sissies. And I don't know who made such a bumper sticker, but it's really kind of true. But you hit on something, those little things, what we call little things, they're not really little things. That's the point. They're not really little things. If
Mhm,
you have a child who is very, very, very sensitive,
mhm,
I had a cousin like that. Everyone picked on him. I got in fights. I got in fist fights in school,
mhm.
defending him from bullies. It's hard, and I never could get them to understand because I was 8 as well. They wouldn't listen to me either. But it shaped his entire life. And I've often wondered if somebody had listened and stopped the bullying, how things would have been different. But yeah, he didn't realize it was trauma.
One of my mentors, in the model that he created, talked about our worldview and how it shapes our worldview. And I always find it fascinating to stop and think about, do you see the world as a safe place or an unsafe place? Because the way you're going to interact in the world is going to depend on how you see it. And I don't think most people stop to really ask themselves those questions
Right.
because a lot of people do not see the world as a safe place. Therefore, you're always on guard. You're always scared. You don't trust that you're going to be okay. You don't trust that bad things aren't going to happen. So I think it's just a really interesting thing to really stop and ask yourself some questions. What is your view?
Yeah.
What do you believe?
Yeah. That's earlier today. The last couple of days has been very, very
It's
difficult.
been a very long year this week.
Yeah, it's been a very long year this week. But earlier today, as I was chasing cows out of my orchard one more time, um, I was talking to a neighbor who had also been chasing the cows. But she said, "Isn't it funny how there's been cows here for years and years and years, and now there's more cows and they're doing more damage. And quite frankly, I'm traumatized." And I thought, by cows? But then I realized, so am I. It's not it's not a fun activity to chase cows around. But it really made me think of all those other little things that when you don't have solid boundaries, which is a big thing people with trauma don't have, um, you kind of let life roll over you.
Mhm.
And when you're letting life roll over you, the world is a very unsafe place. So how do you change that? What I use is the pink elephant thing again, a pink cow, whatever.
I
And
I used to have another trick is that imagine somebody that you love in the same situation or that you really care about. What would you tell them to do? And then do that versus what you would tell yourself to do.
yeah, and usually for me, there's not much of a difference in there because people around me are very much like I am. But it's interesting how we don't realize that we're being pushed. And, until my neighbor had said, it's traumatizing, I wouldn't have looked at it in that frame.
Mhm,
Because to me, it's an annoyance.
mhm.
It's going to be really annoying when my fruit trees start fruiting. But it was, she's traumatized by it. To me, I find it annoying. And maybe that's trauma too.
Well, and I think too, maybe another way of thinking about it, it sometimes when you have a lot of control issues and things that keep happening that are out of your control, no matter how much you keep trying to control it, is a scary thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think any kid who has lived the early part of their childhood knowing that they had to be really quiet, don't make a sound, and hide
Mhm.
when dad came home, I think that lasts throughout your life. Even looking at it, even saying, you were a kid, he had issues, even coming up with all that stuff, it still affects you as an adult. I have a client right now. She can't understand why things are happening in her life the way they are. And it's just trauma, 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 trauma. And what she has done is given up completely. I'm too stubborn for that. But what she has done is given up completely. She just went to a doctor, had herself declared disabled, and is not even trying anymore. And I said, well, that is one way to go. That's one way to go. But it's the trauma. It's okay. He only hit me once that week kind of trauma. Because when you're a traumatized child, what you learn is that no matter what else you do in your life, if someone loves you, it's okay that they hurt you. And that's very not okay. But eventually it made her give up.
I know that we have some people who are watching who are therapists as well. I'm just wondering how they're feeling about this conversation or if there's anything that they'd like to add. So if there is, please put a comment in the comment section. Um, but I think, it's again, most people don't think about it from a metaphysical perspective, but I
Right.
always think about it both ways. And, it's a very difficult thing to work through,
It is.
regardless of the perspective that you have. It takes a long time, and then you also have to go through grief with it
Yeah.
as well, a lot of times too, about and sometimes there's anger when you realize that you get really mad that this happened and robbed you of different things in your life and things like that. So there's also so many emotions and feelings tied up into it, and if you don't know how to process those either,
Right.
it makes for a
Right.
very difficult journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you had trauma or if you come from any kind of family that has dysfunction, chances are you didn't learn how to manage your emotions. And now we're all adults. It's like, well, I don't know how to do this. And to
Right.
say as an adult, I don't know how to do this is oftentimes very difficult for people that they'll keep going down the status quo because they don't want to look like they're the only one who didn't get the rule book.
Right. one of the things that hit me, I turned 30 and realized my childhood was stolen from me.
Mhm.
So I bought myself on my 30th birthday bubbles. And I played with bubbles and played with the cats with bubbles and the dog with bubbles. And, my friends thought I'd lost my mind entirely. But I had to give myself
Mhm.
that childhood experience that I didn't get.
Mhm.
And that raised my energy, just doing that. And we were talking about trauma with energy. And when you're traumatized, you have a very low vibration.
Mhm.
The more you heal, the higher your vibration gets. Even on those days when you're triggered and everything, turns to shit in front of your face, you still have a higher vibration because you're looking at it and you're healing it. Sometimes I've heard people tell me, why bother?
Mhm.
If I'm going to start down this road and I'm going to do the self-care thing, and that's what they call it, the self-care thing, um, but you're telling me that I still might be triggered at some point in the future. Why do it? So what do you tell them?
So one of our viewers, who's also a therapist, said, "I love gifting clients bubbles. Also, it helps with breathing techniques." One of the things I used to tell people I worked with all the time, I never liked calling them patients because they were human beings,
Right.
is that, there's a reason on planes they say put on your own oxygen mask first before assisting others, because if you pass out, you're not going to be able to help everyone. But when you've had situations happen growing up, you learn to put everyone else's oxygen mask on
Yep.
first. So I always said to people, you don't have to be the first person in your life, at least be in your top 10. Huge move up for people. You're not last on the list anymore. You need to be at least in the top 5 to 10 people that you take care of. You don't
Yep.
have to be number 1 if that's too overwhelming for you. But how do you at least move up so that you're not the bottom of the barrel anymore and everybody else's needs comes before yours?
Yep. I had a 9-year-old boy tell me one time, he was in a shelter,
Mhm.
and he said his mom was working 2 jobs and he was trying to cook scrambled eggs. He was 4 when this happened. He was trying to cook scrambled eggs to feed his little sister and himself, and his mom was sleeping, and he didn't want to wake her. And he set the house on fire. And that little kid lived with such a huge amount of just grief and shame and guilt and all of this stuff. I often wonder what happened to that family because they were very close to getting their own apartment. But so many horror stories. And all I could say was, can we sign this kid up for counseling somewhere? Because, when you're working in social services, is what this was, there is no money. And, I was there letting people talk to me because I volunteered there. But some of the horror stories that I heard at that location, you walk out of there and you're literally grateful that you're not in that situation. And yet you're like, can't I fix it? Why can't I fix this? And when you've gone through trauma, and I was right in the middle of healing a lot of stuff of my own, Ben, it really set me back, that poor little kid. And it just, I went back and talked to him for weeks, and it was just letting him get it out because he was afraid to hurt his mom more, and he was afraid he would get in trouble. And it was just, in my mind, I still think about it. That was a 9-year-old, 42-year-old.
Mhm.
And, that's not right. But, that's how we deal with things, I guess. Just,
And we were talking about this at work because I still work in behavioral health. I'm just not doing as much clinical things anymore. But the really interesting conversation is, and this doesn't happen often. The last time this happened was like during 9/11. It came up today in a meeting. It was an example someone used, is that the clinicians are going through the same exact thing that the clients that they're trying to help are going through.
yep.
So how do you manage that? Because more and more people are looking for services and looking for help. And the clinicians themselves are going through all of the same feelings and emotions. And, there's a really high burnout rate among clinical and any healthcare right now, because all healthcare is like stretched to its max.
Well, humanity is broken right now. That's the easiest way to put it. So many people have gone through so much with the pandemic and with, I know 8 marriages that dissolved during the pandemic. It's like people are going through some stuff. And we need to be kinder, I think, to each other. Even and I was on the phone with someone this afternoon, or earlier than the show this afternoon, and she was so worn out. And she is a customer service representative. So imagine how worn out she is. And she said, I try to be kind. But when I say, I'm sorry, I can't do that for you, let me transfer you to another department, and you get cursed at, it's a little hard to be kind. So I think humanity as a whole, we've all gone through so much. And it's just, some people, I guess, need to yell at a customer service representative every once in a while. I don't know.
The person who's watching it said I cut way back on my caseload and gave myself more time to refresh and recharge. And I really think that this is a good place to kind of start to wrap things up for today. Is what does that look like? What is nurturing yourself? How do you soothe yourself in healthy ways? What are some things that people can do? And I think a lot of people go to meditation, but then they beat themselves up that they're not meditating, right?
Yeah.
Properly. So it's really not the effect. For me, I like to create artwork. I'm more creative, and I like to just sit down and draw and see what comes out, what mandala is gonna help humanity right now. And I think reading, I think sometimes it's healthy to lose yourself in TV for a little while, maybe not for days. Talking to people, having people who support you. There's all kinds of hotlines. There's all different kinds of ways to feel supported. And I think that that's really important right now.
Going outside is always my thing. If I can go outside, dig in the dirt, chase a few cows, my day is complete. That's just kind of my life. But I've always done that. I've always liked to dig in the dirt, even if I'm not really planting something. Sometimes I just go outside and dig in the dirt just because I like to do it. I also write. Artwork is great. Find something that resonates with you and do that. You don't need an excuse. And I've heard people say that, well, I can't just sit and write. There's other things I should be doing. You put yourself as a priority. You need that.
Or at least in the top 5 to 10.
Yeah. Right.
So any last thoughts, comments?
I don't have anything.
Okay. So we are going to sign off now then, and we will see you guys all next week. Again, if there's anything you want us to talk about, please reach out to me, reach out to Kelly, post it on YouTube, post it in the group From Fear to Freedom. And we want to tackle and talk about all the things that you guys want us to cover. So have a great evening, everybody.
Bye. Thanks for watching.